I have a problem with authority, so eventually I fire all my bosses and start my own business. But I think it traces back to the childhood, just I'm being pushed out and pushing back.
Yeah, the funny thing about firing all your bosses and then you become your own boss. And are you a good boss?
First off, when I was 6 years old, I broke my neck. So at 6 years of age, I knew I was going to have to make a living with my brain and not with my body. We've gotten over $400 million on 1.9 billion projects coast to coast in the last 20 years.
It's amazing.
I can't put. It seems like monopoly money because I can't wrap my mind around it.
Welcome to the Engineered Success Podcast, where we talk to entrepreneurs, business leaders, and people just like you and me who are on their journey to understanding what success means for them and the most effective path to get there. I'm excited today to be joined by Kevin, and we're going to be diving into his story and what's led him to where he's at today, and how we're going to be able to provide value in this conversation. We're going to learn from Kevin. So thank you so much for being here today, Kevin.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Perfect. I am stoked to dive into your background and your scenario. I know that even leading up into this conversation, we were talking a little bit, we don't know each other that well.
Not at all.
Not yet.
Other than we both have engineering degrees.
Yes. There you go. See, there's connections already, but I'm sure throughout this conversation, we'll find plenty of things that we can both learn from each other, hopefully glean a lot from your story. I know I'm genuinely curious in what your process has been throughout the years and what you've been able to achieve and how you've been able to get to where you are today. So let's take that story back to kind of where you were born, where you were raised, and tell me a little bit about what that looked like for you.
So I was born in Grand Rapids at Butterworth Hospital, but my parents lived in Ionia. My dad was state police. So we moved every 3 to 5 years growing up. So I went from Ionia to Livonia to Marquette to Mason to South Havens, where I went to junior high and high school. So we had a bouncing around childhood.
Yeah, bouncing around. And so your father was in the state police. And that's what led you to moving around, is from the different places that you were stationed?
Correct.
And then did you have brothers and sisters growing up?
I have 2 older sisters and 1 younger brother.
Okay. Awesome. And as you're going through and in that environment with the siblings and moving around a little bit, what are some of the memories that you can bring up of times with your family, the relationship that you had with your parents and with your brothers and sisters?
We were a strange family in the fact that when you move a lot, you don't form a lot of ties with the community. And so depending on what age you are when you went that move, it was a harder move. For example, my sister finished her sophomore year of high school when she had to move and finished the last 2 years of high school at a different school, and that was a really hard move on her. My little brother, he went to kindergarten in Livonia, first grade in Marquette, and second grade in Mason. So he hit where we just had 3 moves really close together. So it all affected them very much differently. My dad was pretty much a state cop, police mentality when he came home, barked a lot. I think he ruled the house with a lot of fear. I can't say I remember my dad spanking me, but it was scarier than the spanking. My mom did the spanking.
And with that, you had a certain level of, okay, this is the way you act around home. This is the types of, ways that you interact with others, adults and parents and things like that. How did that transition into some of the things that you did at school? And
couple things. I have a couple medical conditions that I break things easy. So I broke a lot of bones growing up. I was a late bloomer, so I think I kind of had a chip on my shoulder about a lot of stuff. And then with my dad yelling, I'm like every entrepreneur. I have a problem with authority, so eventually I fire all my bosses and start my own business. But I think it traces back to the childhood, just I'm being pushed out and pushing back.
Yeah, the funny thing about firing all your bosses and then you become your own boss. And are you a good boss?
Correct.
To yourself.
Correct. And, you find out real quick because the only person that can fire you now is your customers.
Yeah.
And
so as you're growing up, you're moving around a little bit more. There's a little bit of instability with the schools that you're in. But what were you interested in middle school, high school? Was it sports or was it entrepreneurship at that point? Or what were you most interested in?
Probably trying to find a girlfriend, but
yeah.
I wasn't very good with girls at that age. And the thing about moving around a lot, I was the enthusiast, so I liked the moving around and I liked seeing new things. So I was kind of gung ho about that. So moving around like that taught me how to try to fit in with groups that had already kind of gelled, and how do you work your way in when you're the outsider. And I didn't quite do that very well in high school and junior high. So I would say in high school, my goal was to go in the Air Force and be a pilot and maybe make it into the astronaut program someday. So way far away from where I am today.
Yeah, but those types of things are visions that you had, and even though it's not where you landed, it set you on a certain trajectory that maybe you shifted a little bit, and we'll get into kind of when and how that happened. But you said something about being interested and enjoying the moving around a little bit. Why did you enjoy that so much?
Just to see new stuff. Going from the suburbs of Detroit to Marquette, Michigan is a blast.
Yeah, it's a difference there.
I mean, we lived off the shores of Lake Superior. We had ponds to swim in, to ice skate on. I was 8 years old. I got snow skis. 8 was the perfect age for me, because you had, at those days, you could go swim in the pond without your mom looking at you, and you didn't have any chores to do at home. So it was perfect.
It's not that way anymore?
Not that way anymore. There's something called responsibility and adultness that finally catches up with it.
Yeah. Yep. So now in middle school, high school, you were in the mindset that, hey, I potentially want to be an astronaut. I want to go into the Air Force. I want to do some of these different things. What were some of the things that you were maybe thinking about intentionally, or that were just what caused you to get excited about that style of a future career?
So a couple things. First off, when I was 6 years old, I broke my neck. So at 6 years of age, I knew I was going to have to make a living with my brain and not with my body. And so I better do good at studying and stuff. And so as I started to get in, also that was the big years of the Apollo program, if you think about it. And so, and I was 11, 12 years old when man landed on the moon. So that was the height of the space program at that point in time. So it generated a lot of interest. So it's not that I had any great career planning ability at 15 years of age. It was just at the forefront of the public, what do you call it? Just the mindset.
That was what was going on in the news. That was what was going on in the economy at that time, and what people were talking about, right?
Exactly.
Do you want to tell a little bit of the story about how you broke your neck in that scenario?
So I have 2 genetic disorders, both very rare, and the odds of having both are even very much more rare. But the first one is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. You would call it double jointed. For example, most people's thumb stops about there. Mine goes that far. And the reason it goes that far is not because the bones are different. It goes that far because the connective tissue doesn't protect the joints the way that it's supposed to. So when I was 6 years old, I saw a snowball coming out of the corner of my eye, and I just flinched like that and popped my neck out of joint and cracked 2 vertebrae, because the ligaments don't hold things in place the way they do. And so when I was 12, I blew out the ligament in my left knee, just plain stuff. And then the other disorder showed up when I was 17 with a hip disorder. So my hip popped out of joint, and I broke my hip when I was 17. So I managed to play a little baseball as a kid. Then I swam a couple of years before I broke my hip, but I never had much of sports momentum in high school because things were breaking.
Yeah, and it seems like you had the opportunity to say, like, hey, I'm prone to these types of injuries, and I have a condition that is holding me back in some scenarios, and you could have used that at that phase of life to say, I'm not even going to try to swim, or I'm not even going to try sports, but it doesn't seem like you did that.
Well, this thing called Ehlers-Danlos was only diagnosed 3 years ago, so I spent my whole life not really knowing what that was. In my hip condition, they kind of knew what it was, but they hadn't done much studying on it, where now there's a whole lot more stuff to do to prevent that. But with joints, you can't, the connective tissue disorder, you can't just change that. But life is a small pit, just this little small piece of what happens to you. The rest is how do you deal with it? What's your attitude? And are you going to be victimized, or are you going to conquer?
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So, and we'll probably dive into a few different scenarios that caused you to say that, right? Because it's so true. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control your thoughts and reactions to what happens to you.
Exactly.
And the changes that, or the decisions that you make in that moment could change your future.
100%.
And I'm excited to dive deeper into, again, why you said that, because I think there's a few different scenarios that might come up. So you're moving around a little bit. You've had some of these experiences in life where you're experiencing some physical pain, right? I assumed as you're going through and having injuries, you're having physical pain, and you're trying to understand. Okay, I want to get into the Air Force. I want to get, become an astronaut, but potentially that's off the table. Now I have to use my brain for my career. What is the next step for you in that process?
So in high school, I went and I took the officer qualifying test for the Air Force, passed that, and then I went and took the physical at Anderson Air Force Base, and then passed the physical, but then they sent me a letter saying, because of your medical history. This was when Vietnam was winding up and the need for pilots was coming down. And so I couldn't make it into the pilot program because they hadn't enough candidates that didn't have these other conditions that they could select from. So at 17, it was like, you're not going to make it in the Air Force as a pilot, and you're not going to be an astronaut. So then, the next few years was a little bit of a struggle. I ended up at Michigan State because living in Mason, Michigan, we used to drive by Michigan State on the way to Lansing. And so it was like, okay, I know that campus a little bit. So that's the only school I applied to. And I got there and they went over my ACT test and they said, hey, what do you want to do? I said, I have no idea. My parents said I have to go to college. They also said I had to pay for it. But anyway, I have to go to college. And so I'm here. So they said, well, you're good at math and science, so why don't you go to engineering? I said, okay. So I went to engineering school. And that was about the extent of how I wound up in engineering.
What did you know about engineering before you started?
Other
than it took math and science?
Yeah, nothing. Nothing.
That's interesting. As I've told this a little bit on this podcast before, but when I was in high school, I was part of like it's called CAP, but a kind of junior Air Force type thing that you did in high school for those that are interested in learning about the Air Force and getting into the Air Force and things like that. And then I was like, okay, maybe the military is not for me. So I did a police academy thing at Grand Valley, like a week-long junior police academy. And made the decision, it's a long story, but made the decision like, hey, police academy is this maybe isn't for me. Let's do engineering. And then it was in engineering. So it's like, I don't feel like I knew that much about it either, but you learn pretty quick, don't you?
You learn pretty quick. Or in my case, you cram 4 years of college into about 5.5.
Yeah. Hey, you and I do have a lot in common. So you went into at Michigan, you're jumping into those first courses. What
Michigan State.
Michigan State.
Let's be clear.
I tried to sneak that in there. Michigan State, as you're getting into those first couple courses, like what's going through your mind? Or you're like, okay, yep, this is a good fit for me, or like, oh, what did I get myself into?
I was, I think I was just more enamored by the freedom, not having parents around, all the girls, and just all the partying. So I think I just kind of didn't even really pay attention. I wasn't very intentional about life. My business didn't really get started till I was about 46 years of age. So I stumbled for a while before it really got clear. I grew up slow. And so it wasn't later in life that I started to really get a grasp of things and where I needed to go.
So you're going through engineering school. You're struggling with focus, right? Because you're spending time in the social aspect of it while also trying to balance, getting some of the school work done. And you're learning things along the way. There are some benefits to the social aspect of schools. When I think about engineering school and time that I went to Grand Valley State and some of the relationships that I built there. I still talk to some of them today. I think that some people they spend too much time only focusing on the school and not who else is there, because there's other future potential business partners or other potential people that you could work for or could work for you at this school in this space all together. What better time to learn about each other's work ethic and things like that, in the social aspect of it. But I know you weren't thinking about that at the time, but you were working at getting through school. Were you holding some part-time jobs and things during that phase or that stage?
I was, but I also started getting involved in like student government in our dorm. And then I eventually was the dorm president, and I was president of my engineering club. So I started to expand and feel more comfortable in leadership roles that I was too shy to participate.
What's the dorm president? I guess I don't.
Well, a dorm at Michigan State has 1,200 students, and so there's there's a bunch of different floors, so each floor has a rep, and so there's a student government that kind of oversees stuff and events and stuff for the dorm.
Okay. So you're putting on those activities and making sure that everything was organized with the events and different things that were going on throughout the year, maybe helping with move in, move out type things. And
exactly. It was almost as much as you wanted it to be or as little as you didn't want it to be, but it was quite active.
What drew you to becoming the president of the dorm?
Well, it's kind of funny. What drew me first to being involved was the fact that I could be my floor representative, and I didn't have to. I was too scared to run for anything in high school. Would people vote for me? And so then I could just be my dorm resident. I was without even having to run, because who would ever volunteer for that?
Yeah, I was wondering.
Would ever volunteer? But the dorm president lived on my floor, so that helped.
Okay.
But as we were going through the stuff, it was time. I was 2 years into this, and it was time for the new dorm president. And the guy that was running, and there wasn't anyone running against him, wasn't someone that we thought was a good job. So one of my friends who was also involved said, "Hey, we got to do something. Let's flip a coin, and the loser can run for president against this guy."
Love it.
So we flipped the coin, and I won the toss. And I said to my friend, "Tim, I will run for president if you run for vice president." And we did. And we had about 2 weeks for the election, and we rallied and took the election. And then Tim went on to become president later of what's called it's a president of all the residence halls, has another association and everything. So he went pretty far as leading dorm government activities.
And he enjoyed it.
And he enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it, and we did some good things the year that I was president.
All because of a coin flip.
Yeah, that I won.
Oh, I think that's interesting. Is like there's this aspect of getting into leadership and getting into this role that you maybe weren't sure if it was really something that you even wanted, but once you got into it, it was like, okay, this is actually kind of maybe a passion or something I could get excited about. Now, as you went through school, was your first, and you graduated, you said 5.5 years. When you graduated, did you get right into an engineering type career, or where'd you go from there?
So there was a couple. How deep do you want to go in this conversation? How many layers do you want to go down in here?
Let's go.
So one of the friends I made my freshman year of college at an in-dorm government had worked for this company in Nashville, Tennessee called the Southwestern Company.
Okay.
And they recruit students, and they take them to Nashville, Tennessee, give them a week of sales training and a box of books, and send them to a different part of the country to sell books door to door.
Okay.
And it's all 100% commission. And I was kind of shy, and I thought, you know what? That's a hard thing to do. It would be good for my personality to go do that.
Very uncomfortable.
So it made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I found myself in Shawnee, Oklahoma, summer of 1976, selling books door to door. I made it through the first summer and came back and paid for my second year of college. I ended up doing that all the way through, and then you can recruit other students to do that. So when I graduated, I had 46 other students that I was getting a sales commission off of their sales.
What was the book again?
It's Southwestern Company. It's now called Southwestern Advantage.
Okay.
They used to, at the peak, they had 7,000 students selling books for them door to door from campuses all across the country. Now it's really quite shrunk a bit because American students just won't take much risk.
And are those like children's books or like
Children's
business
books,
Okay.
cookbooks, study guides, Bible books, Bible dictionaries, a wide variety of stuff. They started during the Civil War. When all the printing presses were in the North, someone smuggled some printing presses into Nashville, Tennessee, and started printing Bibles. And college students would take them and sell them to Civil War soldiers out in the battlefields. So they started that way, and so it's a pretty big company now. They have about 31 different companies in direct sales type stuff. But so when I graduated college, they had a business that sells custom-made suits to business executives in their homes or in their offices.
Okay.
So I went to Louisville, Kentucky, and sold custom-made clothing to business executives for a year and a half.
Wow.
So I'm way out of engineering at that point in time.
Yeah, but the types of situations that you're throwing yourself in doesn't fit the stereotypical like, oh, engineer, sit behind a computer. You mentioned use my brain, right? You're in very social situations.
Most of them uncomfortable, but
very uncomfortable. That's what I was wondering a little bit about how you sell books door to door. Because when I think about door to door salespeople today, I think you're either selling bug services, or you're selling solar, or something like that, and you ride around a little scooter with an iPad. I'm sure it was different.
It was different back then. Yes.
So like, what was the pitch? Like when you knock on a door and like you have books with you, you're just showing the book. Like, how would you get the sale?
Oh, I would just say, hi, Mrs. Jones, because I can't say your name probably cleanly on this conversation. Yeah. My name's Kevin. I'm with the Southwestern Company, and I'm talking to folks with kids in school. And then they'd either say, get the heck out of here, or tell me more. And depending on the response, and we go from there. Then I'd go in and present the books, and they'd either buy them or not buy them.
You feel like, and I'm going to assume the answer is yes here, but as you're doing door to door, people would answer the door a little bit more welcoming for that type of interaction than they are today.
Well, it's interesting you ask that question because my son did this 3 years ago with his company and did equally well selling books in Lowell area of Michigan.
Door to door.
Door to door. So it's surprising that it still works. I was thinking what you are, no one would let you in the door anymore. But the company's still there. But most of the students they get come from Europe, where there's not as many opportunities for college students, and they're more or less risk averse.
Yeah, willing to put in the work and put themselves out there and be told no, and be able to bounce back from that no. So it sounds like you're getting in some reps in sales, right? You're getting in some reps, as you're selling books of like, okay, yep, I got 5 doors shut in my face, but that's okay because it's, the 50th that's going to say yes kind of thing. You're feeling a little bit of that in college already.
So another way of looking at it is if you're shy, you don't know how to communicate very well, or you're scared of people, in 3 months you talk to 3,000 of them. You can get over your shyness pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so it was a good experience for me.
Did you go into it with that kind of intentionality that was like, oh, I should do this because I am uncomfortable in having conversations like this? Or was it, oh, I'm going to do this because I need to make some money?
Oh, when you look in the past, it sometimes sounds better than it was at the present.
Yeah.
But being the adventurer, the thought of going off, doing something had an appeal. The money had an appeal, but it's just, could I really stress myself and improve myself in this arena?
So what was next? So you're learning some of these sales skills, you're building up a team or group underneath you that's selling, and you sounds like pretty successful in the space.
So then when I graduate, the company wants to keep you in one of their other companies. So that's how I ended up in the custom clothing business in Louisville, Kentucky. The problem I had in sales, I would go from great to bad real quickly.
Okay.
It just, the cycle of it just kind of bored me in a sense. And so when I was really into it, I did really well. And then when I wasn't, I didn't do really well. And finally, my boss fired me in the suit business.
Why do you think it went from you were into it and not into it? Just got bored?
Got bored. There wasn't just enough variation into it. I've only found this out 2 years ago, but I'm also on the ADHD spectrum, and there just wasn't the repetitiveness of it. I couldn't deal with it. I could deal with it for a summer, but not for the ongoing year.
You need that excitement. You felt like you kind of figured it out, and now it's like on to the next thing.
Yes, I got this. So what's next? Yeah.
So how did it feel? Was that the first time you got fired?
Yeah.
How'd it feel?
Didn't feel good, but by the grace of God, it's all worked out because the guy who fired me is still a very good friend, and we're going to see him next month. So the friendship endured the firing, and we joke about it now.
And it's one of those scenarios too, which we talked about a little bit at the beginning of this conversation, but you can't control what happens to you. Maybe you could have in some of those scenarios, like showed up a little bit differently at work, right? And been more interested.
Exactly.
But you couldn't, you had the situation of getting let go and getting fired. And then what was your next step? What did you do after that?
My college roommate friend that got me to the book business lived in Lansing, and he was working for IBM, and he just bought a farmhouse. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come live with me? You can stay rent free and just help me remodel the house while you look for work, and I can get you a job interview with IBM." Well, I had just met this young lady at Southwestern every year has an awards event at the end of the summer, and they give you an award for everything because that way they get the parents there, and you get a lot of this applause, and the parents say you should go do that again, even though it's the worst job on the planet. But they do this awards banquet, and the clothing business folks like to go to those banquets to recruit future salespeople from there. So I went with my boss to an event in Chicago and met this young lady who was going to Michigan State. And so I went back to Lansing to live with my buddy, and I called this young lady up, and we're celebrating 41 years of marriage now.
Congrats on that.
So ran into my wife, we got married, and her job could go a variety of different ways. And we took a move to California with her job. So her job got us to California.
What part of California?
Southern California.
Okay.
And then I took a job with Rockwell International and spent 8 years in aerospace and defense doing quality engineering.
So I'm excited to dive into that.
And then they sent me to MBA school.
Yeah. So quality engineering, were you out on the manufacturing floor? Were you doing more like product development type things? Like what was the phase of the development process that you were a part of at that?
So in aerospace and defense, it's really different because, for example, you get a contract to build B-1 bombers. Well, you build 100 of them. We had ICBM guidance and control system. So we had the Peacekeeper missile. We had all the Minuteman guidance and control. So you have really small stuff. So you do have a lot of lab development, a lot of stuff going on in the labs. So I'm seeing things in the news now that's being deployed that I saw in the labs 35 years ago. And so quality engineering, you hit a whole wide variety of stuff. So
yeah, and it's got to be right.
Yeah, my first project was there's different divisions of Rockwell. I was in Anaheim. My division was more focused on, like I said, the ICBM guidance and control, which also included nuclear subboat carrying missiles. We did the guidance control there. But we also did other special projects. And one of the projects we were doing is I had the bomb rack for the B-1 bomber. And since a bomber flies pretty fast, when you let a bomb go, you got to not just let it go, you got to push it away from the plane as fast as you can. And we were having problems with that process in that line. So that was my first project, was to kind of get in there and sort that out.
So did you have to do like validation and testing, or was it, different scenarios you had to run?
Yeah, one of the problems was when we did the test, first off, the bomb rack blew out on the side because it uses shotgun shells to load this thing up. So first off, the casting blew out. And second of all, getting them together was a problem. And as I got into it, I found out that a lot of the parts and castings that we bought weren't to spec. They were larger, and as you put these bomb racks together, they increased in size. Mm. And so we cleaned out all our parts, got the right parts in. The testing site didn't really have specification for it. They had a drawing, but it was really, really loose. So we tightened up the test equipment, tightened up the testing process, and got that thing back on track. So,
were you managing people at that time? I know that in college you had the opportunity to get involved in, being the president of the dorm and a little bit of like leadership of others, and then you did spend some time in sales. At this point, are you focused on the practice of engineering and process and quality engineering, or are you also leading people at that phase?
At that phase, I was an individual contributor. About 2 years later, they promoted me.
And that's about the time that you got into the MBA program?
Yes.
And was that a school also in California, or where was that?
It's in Claremont, California.
Okay.
And one of the benefits of that school was they had this little-known professor called Peter Drucker on staff there. Mm. So I got to go to a really good MBA school.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Assuming people know who Peter Drucker is, Peter Drucker had a 2-hour, 45-minute lecture twice a week. Normally, most professors would give you a break somewhere in the middle. Peter ran for 3.5 hours with no break and made 3 points. 3 points. And when he got done making his point, he'd hit an issue from so many different angles historically and with different fields. And what you got out of that is that there are no new problems. Everything that you run into has happened before. Now, where can you draw examples from other things to apply it to that and to solve things? So the Claremont approach to MBA was very different than like a Harvard Business School, where you do a lot, at least at the time, where you did a lot of case studies. And the problem with case studies is you can look at a case and look back, and then you can say, oh, that's what you should have done. What Peter Drucker was trying to say is that when you run into a situation, what question should you be asking in order to take that situation on? So it was about thinking, not just analyzing what had happened. Postmortem is easy.
Did you like that experience?
Oh, I love that experience.
Yeah, I can tell.
I love that experience.
And I bet that it was something that you not only sat through the 3 hours and the 3 points, but absorbed and took a lot of that and put it into place.
Definitely. Because Peter had the idea, one of the points, Peter made lots of points, but two of them that stuck with me. First one is that everyone thinks of innovation as being product innovation. At that time, he wouldn't say what's the next iPhone, but what's the next iPhone, laptop, things like that.
Same thing as last year's, just with more cameras.
Well, and so what he said is there's this thing called process innovation. And if you can take the parts that exist and rearrange them in a way no one's envisioned, sometimes you can add value that the market's willing to pay for that no one else is claiming. And so that was key in what Capital for Compassion developed, that thought. And then the other thing is, he didn't quite say this, but it's attributed to him, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so if you have the right culture, people will figure out what to do.
And at the time, you were working for a business that sent you there for your MBA, correct? To pull those things and then see how you could apply them to that organization. Was that something that you were able to do, or did you notice through that experience that, hey, this is something that I'm going to use for something else?
So aerospace and defense is an interesting field. The government for years would contract on what they call the cost plus basis. So basically a contractor, they take all their costs and give it to the government plus a profit percentage. The more cost, the more profit. And so there was no reason to innovate, to be efficient, to look at better ways to do things. Defense contractors became very lethargic and very bloated and just crummy culture. Well, the government finally wised up and said, you know what? Let's have fixed price contracting. Yeah. We'll fix the price, and if you come in under your cost estimates, well, you get to make more money. And if you come in over, you got to pay for it. And so they were looking for people who could take what was there and improve it and do things better than what we'd done before. So I started inheriting problem projects that were getting over budget.
and there were probably a handful that you had the opportunity to get involved with.
Correct.
And how long did you end up doing that?
So I think a total of about 8 years
Okay.
is what that ended up
Okay.
being.
So plenty of projects you were able to take on and tackle, and did you find that most of them you were able to easily find the waste and turn back around, or was it more difficult than you expected?
When you're dealing with organizational bureaucracy, knowing what to do is usually the easy part. So motivating people to do it is the hard part. So if you look over something and you say, oh, here's these 10 things that are wrong, you really got to say, here's the 3 things that can get significant momentum change. And then let's see if we can motivate the people to do these 3 things. So it was being able to balance what was wrong with how to get it done.
And how'd you do that? Like, how did you take those 3 things and, find ways to move the needle on those 3 things and motivate the people around it?
The quick answer is I can't quite remember anymore because that was over 30 years ago. The longer answer is a lot of it was just personal relationships and talking with people and getting inside. And early on in my career, growing up with a authoritative dad and having a problem with authority, you'd think that'd make you soft and good, but sometimes the reverse happens. People deal sinfully with being sinned against, and so you sometimes repeat the sins of the father. And so early on, I tended to be a little gruff and pushy, and I had the weight of the VP behind me. But that wasn't going to get results, and I had to learn how to soften up and to work. Early on, the succinct way of saying that is process was more important than people. And somewhere in the middle there, I made that switch to people are more important than process. And then we started to work with the people that needed to make the changes in order to make that process go.
Makes a lot of sense. I regularly we say in my business we'll say it's a process problem before it's a people problem, and kind of not the reverse of what you're saying, but looking at it from the other angle of when there is a problem, let's not default to this is the wrong person, or the person messed something up, or the person made a mistake, or the person intentionally didn't do something. Well, let's stop and let's look at the process first, and let's understand, did we have a process in place where it was communicated that this is what needed to be done and this is how you did it, and did they follow the process? Or they might have just followed the process and the process was bad, so let's default to that. Let's look at the process first, but also understand that the people are important and more important as well.
And sometimes with process change, if you can just set clear expectations, standards, and communicate on that, a lot of times a lot of noise goes away rather quickly.
Yeah, communication, transparency.
Correct.
Talking through some of that makes a lot of sense. So you spent 8 years in that industry, changing that mindset that people had around the way that things used to be done to the way that things needed to be done now. Now, let's say after that 8 years, you made a change. What was that?
It's called the Anaheim Hills landslide of 1993. In 1993, I was out of town. I was with a supplier in Florida trying to get my flight test equipment done. And my wife got a knock on the door, and the knock on the door said, we're evacuating the neighborhood. You have a half hour to be out of the house. Turns out that the neighborhood was sitting on a dry landslide, and we got 18 inches of rain, and the hillside was shifting. What happened was half our house stayed exactly where it belonged, and the other half didn't. Just moved a few inches. Landslides are uninsurable events. So in 93, we lost all of our investment in real estate in Southern California. And so it was real hard to buy real estate without a down payment in California at the time. So I put my resume out to friends. 3 different friends contacted me about Hayworth. And I connected with Hayworth, and they eventually hired me and moved us back to Michigan.
That brought you into this back to this glorious state, huh?
Exactly.
And nothing wrong with that. I'm sorry to hear about that story. And sometimes it's again the situations that happen to you couldn't control, but the reaction to that and how you said, "Hey, we're going to make a move. We're going to do what we need to do to continue forward progress," and that might mean we need to move.
Well, 6 months before the landslide, my wife had been in a car accident, and she was pregnant. And that caused some preterm labor, and she ended up being in the bed for 9 weeks to stop the baby from being born. And so my daughter Joy was born in November, a month early. So then the landslide occurred in January. So we were just thrilled that Joy was healthy. House is replaceable. Our daughter was healthy. So the news didn't know how to deal with us because they wanted to see someone who's ready to sue the government and anybody and everybody. And we're just saying, we're thankful. No one was hurt. Our daughter's healthy. This is replaceable. Mm. And so, we had a lot going on.
I'm sure that during that time, you probably had a little bit of like, hey, I could be upset about insurance and I could, want to go this route because maybe there's others that are. Why do you think that you were filled with the gratitude of everyone being safe and everyone being healthy? And like, I guess, what was going through your mind as to why this is what you camped out on versus, the anger?
Someone just asked me that recently, and they said, well, you just, looking at it through reverse lenses, and it was all real easy at the time. And the answer is twofold. The frustrating part was any other project I could say, here's the start point, here's these steps, here's the end point. I didn't know how to manage my way through this process, and because we had to negotiate with banks and all sorts of stuff. And so that was a little frustrating, but God just gave us a supernatural peace during that time. It's, the thing I like about the story of Joseph is his brothers sent him to slavery, and God did great things out of that. And he had peace somehow during that time. So God showed up and gave us supernatural peace. It wasn't us, it was God. God just was all over that one. So
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And then also brought you back to West Michigan, back to Hayworth for the first time. You have a young family at this time. What was your position at Hayworth?
What Hayworth was doing, their goal in the office furniture industry was overhead was about 35%. Standard for most office furniture manufacturers at the time. And Hayworth was on their goal was to drive overhead down to about 12%, maybe even 9%. To have cost advantages in the marketplace. So they wanted me to take my industrial engineering background, my process improvement stuff I'd done with Rockwell, and apply it to office processes so that we could be more effective there. But they wanted to proactively do it in a culture that wanted to do that. So I was a business process consultant with my company being the offices of Hayworth Corporate.
Okay. And then did you find when you got into furniture world versus aerospace and defense that there were similarities as far as waste, or there were different types of problems? I know you mentioned that the culture wanted to do it. So maybe the political side of it was a little bit easier to get things done because they had the mindset of, hey, we want to be better and we want to improve. You had more buy-in from the rest of the organization. But were the problems similar?
No, because the culture was so much different. When I was at Rockwell, I'd be in many meetings where everyone else in the room was 20 years older than me at least. And it was they'd been there. That's the only job they'd ever worked. And so I was the young kid that, I had to step slowly in that, or not so slowly sometimes. At Hayworth, it was like, I'm dealing with very capable people who want to do something and they're incentivized to get things done. So it was a blast.
Yeah, it's more fun.
It's more fun, or funner. But my wife tells me that's not a word.
No, fair enough. I know that you had just gone through an experience with the landslide and with your house and with insurance and everything, and then having to move and having a young family, having a young child. That is probably a scenario where you had the opportunity to feel a little bit depressed or a little bit sad throughout this, but yet you mentioned that you were filled with joy because everyone was safe, and then you had something greater come out of it with a job that you enjoyed and loved too, which it sounds like, at the end of the day, it was a blessing to have the opportunity to make the move.
And First year back in Michigan, I met Daryl Bartlett, who was the executive director of the Holland Rescue Mission. And he started sharing the vision of what they were doing and how they were doing it, and would bring guys from their program to Sunday school, and they'd give their testimonies. And we just kind of got connected, fell in love with the Holland Rescue Mission, and got involved there.
So tell me about the Holland Rescue Mission.
So when we lived in California, one time our Sunday school class wanted to do something, and one guy said, "Oh, we should picket abortion centers." And I'm going, "Well, why don't we go visit a rescue mission?" Picketing's a little stressful to me. Let's go see if we can help the homeless. And so we went and we visited a rescue mission in downtown LA. And as we're going through this tour, outside there's a bunch of people standing around looking like they're half stoned. And inside there are people eating, showering, things like that. Excuse me. And from what I could see, here's a bunch of people drinking and drugging, and when they get tired, they can come in here and have a break and get caught up, and then they can go out and drink and drug. So the question is, how do you keep the line from growing? And no one had an answer for that. And when I met Daryl Bartlett, he had answers for that. And his theology preceded his anthropology. And what I mean by that, before he had, here's how we do something, he had a biblical reason for doing that. And so there was strong accountability built into the programs at the Holland Rescue Mission. And so I knew that donating there was going to help people get up, give them a hand up, not a hand out, so to speak, use that old saying. So we just liked the place. They were doing good.
And how did you get involved?
Well, I started donating money. Started when Daryl had a business problem, I'd come in there and take what I knew at Hayworth and just kind of problem solve with this team from time to time.
Love it. And as you're going through and taking opportunities to get involved in the community, as well as, grow at Hayworth, and that is taking off and you're enjoying that. At this point, you have one child, Joy, you mentioned?
Joy was the third born.
Third, okay.
So we had the fourth while we were at Hayworth.
Okay. And all girls, boys, girls?
First was a boy, then 3 girls, and then there's still 2 more boys after that. Okay. So.
And then you mentioned 41 years of marriage. Did your wife stay at home with them, or did she work in the area as well?
So my wife's got an undergrad in marketing.
Okay.
And then when we started having kids, she went back to nursing school and picked up a nursing degree. Because with nursing, you can work part-time and make decent money and do meaningful work. And so she did that. And when we came back to Holland, everyone was into this homeschooling thing. And our kids asked to be homeschooled, which my wife didn't want to do. But she ended up homeschooling for 25 years. Then I'm trying to think. She worked at Holland Hospital for a season. But for the last 10 years, she's been more involved with jail ministry. Up till COVID, she was the assistant women's chaplain at the Ottawa County Jail. Now she's heavily involved with Celebrate Recovery and serves on the senior leadership there. So she's really passionate about helping women. So she's kind of taken our focus with homelessness and just applied it to a different population group.
Yeah. No, that's an amazing story. And I'm curious on, a lot of times people talk to like homeschool moms and ask like, how is it homeschooling, your kids? But, you don't get the chance to talk too much or experience or get feedback from homeschool dads. So from you, how is your experience, with your kids being homeschooled, and things that you saw or liked or didn't about that experience, that from the father perspective?
So first off, I don't think there is such a thing as a homeschool dad, because most dads don't do much with homeschooling except delegate it to their wife. And I apologize to any dads who hear this and did that, but I was the principal, and other than that, the wife did the homeschooling. We'd review curriculum together, but we did a variety of stuff. For example, the first 2 kids ended up going outside the house for high school. The second 2, we homeschooled all the way through. And the last 2, we homeschooled till high school, and then Holland Christian schools came up with a homeschool track where you could go to school 2 days a week with other homeschool kids in a classroom situation. And so he did a couple years of high school that way. And then I told my wife, you've been doing this for 25 years. Why don't here's your pin, you retire. We'll send Ian to high school at Holland Christian. So they all had somewhat of a different track in there. But I think from my perspective, the two children that went all the way through homeschooling, they knocked it out of the park in college. My daughter came back and told my wife, she goes, this reading list at school is nothing compared to the reading list I had at home.
You didn't tell me that you were trying to make me an overachiever, Mom.
Dad, there's people in my Bible class that have never read through the Bible. She'd only read it about 10 times every year. Yeah. Once a year for 10 years. So they did really well in life. And my last two went out for high school. They're doing really well. So there's a lot of paths to get there.
Yeah.
And so I just wish I'd had more involvement in the process.
Yeah, as we're just reflecting on that. So I was homeschooled my entire life and had the opportunity. I've talked about this on this podcast before too, but had the opportunity through that. Definitely a lot of the teaching and the coursework and things were done by my mom. My dad owned his own business, but there were scenarios where it was like, okay, once I gave my mom enough run for her money where she was like, okay, you need to step out. I would sit out in the shop or spend some time with my dad. And, maybe there were times when I, learned just as much out there, right? Working or just watching, just observing and seeing, different work ethic styles or different ways that he worked too. So it gave opportunities that, I was able to have experiences that I was able to have growing up that I maybe couldn't have had or maybe wouldn't have had in other areas.
So you just jogged my memory. I took my kids on field trips to rescue missions. So, in fact, my daughter works for me. She's been with me for 9 years now. So my kids I did a good job with field trips.
Why did you think that was important to take your kids on field trips to rescue missions?
First off was to give my wife a break. Second,
I don't care what you do, just get them out of the house.
Second of all, it was fun to be involved where I could be involved in a way that I knew how to be involved. I'm going there anyway. Let's go. So we had some great trips doing that. Most of these ministries welcomed me into board meetings. It was really interesting. They were well received and welcomed. So that was kind of. I think I got more contracts that way by bringing cute kids to the meeting.
That paid off that way. So what were some of the ways that they were able to help and support? So, or maybe some ways that, there's plenty of homeschool families out there, or even you don't have to be homeschooled to get involved, but what are some ways that families can get involved in rescue missions these days?
Oh man, there's a million ways. My kids, I didn't tell you this part, but I actually ended up working at the Holland Rescue Mission for 2.5 years after I left Hayworth. And so my kids would come down once a week and sort food. They'd come sort letters. They'd clean. A lot of ways. If you're an adult, you see a guy in the street that says, "We'll work for food." The problem with that is you just see that person one time, you never see him again. If you really want to help someone that's homeless, go develop a relationship with them and spend some time with them. So go to the rescue mission, meet one person, and go see them once a week.
So let's jump back to that transition that you made from Hayworth to the Holland Rescue Mission. What caused you to make that change?
Two things. First off, at Hayworth, they were chasing this thing called the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. And they had got nowhere in that process. And it's a written application around 24 criteria. And you have to show, here's my approach, here's my deployment, here's my results. And they had never gotten that award. So when I went there, I was at Hayworth for 8 weeks. And they said, hey, state of Michigan just came out with a quality award. We want to support the state effort. We can't win, but we want to support it. You're the project leader. So I had a couple months to come up with a 75-page application and develop it. Later that year, we were the first winner, along with U of M hospitals. We were the first two winners of the Michigan Quality Leadership Award. So we won that process, and then I had the project again, and we were a finalist 2 years later at the Malcolm Baldrige Award process. So that taught me MBA school engineering school doesn't teach one how to write. MBA school taught me how to write, and the Baldrige process taught me how to write competitively. And those would all come together when I formed Capital for Compassion. So I had done that, and I was doing other things, but I was starting to get a little bored, and I'd been with Rockwell's a big company. There were 10,000 people at my site in Anaheim, California. Hayworth has a couple thousand here at corporate, and I was kind of getting tired of working for big organizations. Plus, I was getting to know the mission more and more, and Daryl Bartlett one time at lunch said, "Hey, why don't you come work for me?"
And what was your role when you started at Holland?
So I had overall responsibility for running all the operations and ministry operations of the Holland Rescue Mission day to day, while Daryl Bartlett worked on the Muskegon Rescue Mission and Youth for Christ, Youth for Christ, and then also raised capital campaign to build the next building. So he was kind of off on special projects for a couple of years there.
I'm sure that, you've been involved in this type of work for years already before you kind of took a full-time position. But was there anything as you jumped into that role that was like, okay, this is different than I expected, or, this was eye-opening to me in a certain way, or is it kind of what you expected when you jumped in?
What I was surprised by it, and this is not any reflection on the organization I worked with, because I've now learned it's true of a lot of ministries, but ministries are just as bureaucratic and political as any other organization. And the reason is because there's people working there. So I thought it'd be more ministerial, and there'd be more harmony and peace. And it was just the same chaos as any other company.
So some of your skills that you had learned previously at Rockwell and other scenarios helped you move the needle in the new position.
Exactly. And what I found was expectations were important to set. And sometimes there was the wrong expectation. For example, one time I was going through a problem situation with one of the employees, and they said, "Well, I thought we were a ministry here." I go, "What's that mean?" He goes, "Well, since we're a ministry, shouldn't you go easier on this stuff? Since we're a ministry, shouldn't we do our best? Shouldn't we even be better than the rest of the world in this stuff?" So they were using the excuse of being a ministry that we should have slack standards for work performance. I found I just had to set the right expectations even in the ministry.
Yeah, I can feel like that. I can understand how that would be difficult to manage, especially when someone doesn't see it from the same perspective that you do, right? And they had a different understanding or thought as to what ministry meant.
First 9 months was terrible. It's terrible. It was stressful because I basically had to fire half the staff and then reorient the other half into some move positions. And it took a couple of years, but we got to a great place.
And I've heard you mention it a couple of times, but what are you up to today?
So there's this thing called Capital for Compassion. And the idea of Capital for Compassion is that organizations that are doing works of compassion, such as housing the homeless, we get capital, brick and mortar dollars for their buildings. So I worked at the Holland Rescue Mission for 2.5 years, and then I left there. And there's a debate whether I was fired or if I quit. And we tell the story differently. I think I was fired, but Daryl says I quit. But the friendship endured.
Yeah.
And 2.5 years later, after that, Daryl called me and said, "Kevin, would you write this grant for us? We got an opportunity for this grant request." And I said, "Heck no, I've never written a grant. Get someone who knows what they're doing." And Daryl Bartlett said, "Kevin, you know the heart of what we do. You know the business world. You did the Baldrige process at Hayworth. You know how to write this kind of writing. Plus, you'll work for cheap." So Daryl made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So in September of 2003, I took on my first grant writing project. So it was 3 long weeks. I sat there with my laptop and a bottle of Excedrin and worked my way through it. And 3 months later, in December of 2003, it was awarded $482,000. And that was Project 1. Then the phone rang, and it was Mike Brown at the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission, and Mike wanted his $482,000. Because if Daryl got $482,000, well, he deserved $482,000. So I wrote 2 more requests for both Kalamazoo and then the Saginaw Rescue Mission, and got each of them $500,000. And then the next phone call was from Ralph Plum, and he was at the Union Rescue Mission in downtown Los Angeles, because he had been at International Aid in Grand Haven before he went there, so he knew Daryl. Turns out there was a trade association for rescue missions, and they all talked to each other. So after we got Daryl money, we sat down, and Daryl said to me, he said, Kevin, this could be huge for the kingdom. Missions don't know about this. Our funding source has this word called Federal Home Loan Bank, but it's private banking industry money. But when people hear that word federal, they think federal government. Mm-hmm. He said, so first off, they hear that word federal, they won't want it. Second, they don't know how to do this, but this could be huge for the kingdom if you could do this for rescue missions. So next thing I know, the phone's ringing off the hook, and we're coast to coast working on projects around the country.
And when you started, did you kind of do it on your own, or did you do it as Capital for Compassion right away, or when did that form?
No, it was Kevin Foster and Associates, and my associates were like my daughter Joy and my daughter Kay and my wife and the dog and the cat.
Yeah.
I tried to sound bigger than just Kevin.
Yeah.
But it was Kevin Foster and Kevin in this controlling way doing 100% of everything so that it was perfect the way Kevin would do it.
But you had no idea how the outcome could. You had no vision for what this potentially could be, and it became something that maybe you didn't expect.
So Daryl Bartlett said to me, he said, this could be big for the kingdom. And I agreed with him at the time. We both underestimated it. We've gotten over $400 million on $1.9 billion projects coast to coast in the last 20 years.
It's amazing.
I can't put, it seems like monopoly money because I can't wrap my mind around it.
Yeah. And the impact.
There are 27,000 beds of affordable housing out there where the gospel of Jesus Christ is preached daily.
27,000.
27,000 and climbing. 27,000. Who would have thunk? So my resume displays great lack of career planning. It's all very eclectic because you've heard it here in the last 40 minutes. It's all over the board, but it's all been brought together and being used in a way that I couldn't envision. You know, I'm not a great entrepreneur. I've got an engineering undergrad and I got a master's with a focus on strategic planning. And this thing just hit me between the eyes. All I had to do was go do it. Now, I put a lot of energy into instruction, how I did that. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like I put together a business plan then started doing this. It ran into me.
I love that. And it kind of goes along with the theme of the conversations on the Engineered Success podcast, the idea of, hey, is success and where we are in our future something that we ourselves engineered and through our own actions that came to be, or is it something that, you know, through faith and just taking that next step and understanding that some of it's outside of our control really created a better future and a better scenario for ourselves and others than we could have even dreamed?
So this is where goes back to the earlier conversation about Peter Drucker on innovation, process innovation. When I started this business, I looked out and I said, okay, out there are consultants that are called capital campaign consultants, and they take a project and they look for 100% of the funding and they try to go to all these various sources. So they're project specific. I said, what if I was funding source specific and didn't try to do the whole project? I just knew this funding source better than anyone in the country and let someone else take care of the project. That did a couple things. One, I knew the funding source better, but two, all the capital campaign consultants, their hardest money to raise was the last $500,000 to $1 million. And if I could serve that up for them, they were bringing me projects. So right away, I had people bringing me projects. I wasn't competing with them. So I created a business that I'm not competing with everyone, and they're bringing me projects. So that was where, the BD Capital for Compassion was process innovation being funding source specific. As I look at that, and I'm kind of a piker because the real people making money, they're funding source specific in other bigger funding pools. This is a little funding pool to the people chasing tax credits. But we're dominating it for the kingdom.
And making an impact. For those that are hearing your story and hearing what you're doing and the impact that you're making for the kingdom, how can they get involved?
Wow. You mean with the Capital for Compassion or just with the kingdom of helping the homeless?
Yeah, both.
So, first off, read the book When Helping Hurts, because there's a lot of do-gooding that we do in the church that makes the problem worse than helping out. And I first saw that one time a lady was trying to give food to a person that had a sign, "We'll work for food." And a member of the Highland Rescue Mission was telling the lady that this person, they've already offered them a place to come sleep and eat and get food, and they didn't want to go there because they're making far more money doing that and they really weren't homeless. They just had this appearance of homeless. And this lady finally gave the bag of food to the person from the mission and said, "Well, here, get this to some homeless people." So we see a need, we want to respond to it, and sometimes there's the reason to do that, and then sometimes there's a reason not to do that. So understanding how to approach the homeless is a good idea. Getting more experience in that is a great thing. The Highland Rescue Mission a couple of years ago ran a campaign called Real Change, Not Spare Change. Most panhandlers are not homeless. It's just it's a great tax-free way to make a lot of money really quick. There's a lot of people who give out of a sense of guilt. They see something, I want to do something, here's money. If you really want to change homelessness, you got to jump into people's lives, and that's different. The word compassion means suffering with. It doesn't mean just giving and going. So if you want to really help the homeless, go suffer with them, get into their lives, and start to help them out of it with making better choices and some level of accountability. Getting involved with Capital for Compassion, that's a different thing because we're unique to Steve, and I don't have a growth strategy. I take growth as it presents itself, and if we don't have a growth year, I'm okay with that as well, because for me, working with a great group of people and not trying to grow the business is less stressful than trying to just add people and grow and grow and grow. We're content to do the work that God's given us, and I have more strength, more qualified people than I've ever had before. I can't say I've recruited them. God kind of sends them to me. And I think you probably haven't covered this, but the real jobs, the good jobs out there, you're not going to find listed. You're going to find jobs through networking because you got to find the job before someone knows they have a job problem. But getting involved with Capital for Compassion would be more if someone has an interest, I talk with anybody, but it's usually like about a 2-year process. It's not just we got to get to know somebody before they can come on board because they've got to fit the culture. We've been very intentional with that second Peter Drucker quote about culture eating strategy for breakfast. So we have a very unique company culture. I don't provide much other than an opportunity and full information. So we share full financials with everybody. Everyone knows how much everyone's making. They know how much I'm making. They know how the business is doing. And I found that that's more healthy than trying to keep those numbers hidden.
Yeah, there's a scenario of lack of transparency where in someone's mind they're coming up with their own story, whether it's right or wrong, and typically it's not in the positive light of what it probably is reality. So might as well just be transparent with it, right?
A friend of mine has a business. They do $8 million in sales.
Yeah.
If you ask his employees how much he makes, they think he makes $8 million.
Probably makes 30. Yep.
Yeah, 30 million. Yeah, makes it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, full transparency usually brings people back down to what's really going on.
Yeah.
But we have a very open culture, a very sharing culture. Everyone works out of their house. Everyone coordinates their own schedule. I had a consultant say to me the other day, "Well, do you have a KPI, key performance indicator for people's efficiency?" And I said, "I don't care how efficient they are." "How can you not care how efficient they are?" I care is the project wrapped up tightly and is it delivered on time? If they do it inefficiently, it comes together well and gets the dollars awarded, who cares how they work? And so work culture is very different.
Yeah, and I'm curious. You've already had the opportunity to make a lot of impact with what you've been working on and what you've done. So it's inspiring to hear your story. But I am curious. As you've seen what's been able to be accomplished over the last few years with the work that you've done, what are you most excited about as you look out into the future? Call it 5 or 10 years. Like, what are some things that you're seeing, whether it's with homelessness or whether it's with what you're doing with Capital for Compassion or other things? What are you most excited about?
To answer this question without getting too far into the political world, for the last 15 to 20 years, the government's pursued this approach called housing first. And under a housing first approach, the solution's housing. So you have someone's homeless, just put them in a house. There's probably 20 different reasons why someone's homeless. And to take and think you have one silver bullet for all doesn't work. And all that's happened is homelessness has increased even more over the last 20 years than before. The principles of when helping hurts. The White House recently issued a statement on how we've got to get people more into these other programs. Step in the right direction. Imperfect step. But like I said, there's 20 reasons, so you can't just have one solution for everything. So I'm hopeful that we start really addressing the problem. The West Coast has made the mistake of glamorizing homelessness. And there's all these camps, and they've just made it, kind of hipster to be homeless. And we've lost for lack of better words, when they were vagrants, there was some shame with being a vagrant. And I'm not saying shame's good, but sometimes shame is a good thing for those who are trying to game the system. So you'd get one category of homelessness back to work just by them not knowing they can game the system. It's a complicated problem. I'm not going to solve it, but I've walked most poor streets in this country, and I've seen more than most. And you can't just solve homelessness with stuff. There's one of my customers is called Mobile Loaves and Fishes in Austin, Texas, and their small home community of RVs, trailers, tiny homes, and they have missional units where people in the church and the community intentionally live there. And their motto is housing doesn't solve homelessness, community solves homelessness. And so that's why compassion is really suffering with. You got to get into people's lives, and you can't give it by giving them $5 on the street. The only reason I'd never give someone $5 on the street is if I always saw them at the same spot. I was going to intentionally try to work them towards a better solution over time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's good advice, and definitely encouraging to hear that there's people like you that have understanding in depth of the problem, but also, that there's more than one solution, and we should be exploring how to really solve this problem, and there's not just one silver bullet. I'm curious if you can think back to your story. You've already brought up scenarios of how you have landed in a place that you didn't dream of when you first started. You had different aspirations. You went to engineering school, you had different things that you were doing, and you are where you are today. If you had the chance to go back and talk to someone that's maybe feeling like, hey, I'm not sure, like I've just lost my job, or I just went through this, scenario with my home where I lost my home. I just had this thing happen to me in my life, and I just don't know what's next. Do you have a piece of advice that you would give to them, just from your experience and what you've had the opportunity to go through that might, help them through that?
Couple thoughts of that, Stephen. First off, someone that lost a job, I don't know too many people that 2 years later weren't in a better place. And I can usually point them to multiple places to go talk to someone who's walked that path and they're now in a better place. People usually sometimes getting fired is just a way. In my world, in my economy, if you haven't been fired a time or two, you just haven't really tasted life yet, or you haven't taken enough risk. So I would encourage people to go to just go explore. The other thing is if they're a Christ follower, if they believe in Jesus, if you believe you're going to spend eternity in heaven, truly believe that down in your heart and soul, then you've got a lot of freedom to experiment, take risk. Because if you lose it all, what happens? Then you lose it all. Money is a renewable resource. And you've seen time again how people make a lot of money, lose it all, make a lot of money, lose it all. Life goes on. So don't live in fear. Some people have a scarcity mentality. Some people have, abundance mentality. Thank you. I was struggling for that word. But where are your eyes focused? Jesus' disciples in the boat were focused on the storm. Focus on Jesus. There's calm in the middle of the storm. Storm's not the problem. Storm can only kill you. Job can only take away your money for a little bit. So I would just encourage them not to lose hope. Press on. There's a better future.
I love it. That is very encouraging. So thank you so much for that. As you're thinking through, we're going to get into the last question here.
Already, man, I was just getting warmed up.
Well, if there's anything else that you would like, to share before we get into that, I would love to hear it. Is there anything else that, based on your story, that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure we did?
I have a couple. My company, the folks, they call them Kevinisms. So I got a couple Kevinisms.
Yeah, I love it.
So the first thing is that Capital for Compassion is a for-profit ministry. Think about that. What's a for-profit ministry? We pay taxes. We make a profit. We just don't make as much profit as we could if we wanted to. So that does two things. One, it creates a different partnership with our customers where they treat us as more family than a vendor. And two, the other thing is it keeps competition from coming and trying to duplicate what we want, or what we're doing, because we don't have offices, we don't have all this overhead. And so we can be priced different in the marketplace. So we don't have competition. We're making a great living. We're doing good work. So if we do our job right, people will talk about our being a for-profit vendor. One of my early customers was Mike Sicosio at the City Mission of Schenectady. And Mike told me after we got done, he said, Kevin, with other vendors, they do well, then we do well. With you, we do well, then you do well. In both scenarios, the kingdom is advanced, but the focus with Capital for Compassion is first on the kingdom, then on themselves. And that's, I think, what makes Capital for Compassion precious in what we do.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and again for telling us your story. It's definitely been inspiring and something that I know is going to make an impact on those that are listening and trying to understand, hey, what's next for me, and how can I learn from Kevin and the way that he's articulated those different stages that he's gone through in his life. And I'm curious, as we wrap up, Kevin, and just you've already alluded to some of these things as far as your definition of what success is for you, but can you articulate for us what your definition of success is?
When you're a young person, like going through college, I got to get, as I used to put on the wall, here's my classes, and I mark them off as I got through, and to see this credit line go down till it says 0 and I graduate. You always have these events that are future driven. Life's not lived in the future, though. Life's lived today. And so for me, success is finding contentment and godliness in the middle of the storm, how life is today, not in some future event. What life is, what God's given me here today, let's be content and use all the gifts and talents and resources I have to the best of my ability. So success is not some future event. Quite frankly, I'm 68 years old. We've been doing this a long time, so I solved all the financial issues in life. But we're still advancing the kingdom through the work that we're doing because we're created for a purpose, and the purpose is to. And work is may not be our identity, but work is our calling. We're called to work. So success is my wife loving me today and me loving my wife. I'm paying attention to my kids. My kids paying attention to me. Tomorrow we're on our way to Rose Hill in the Detroit suburbs, where our daughter's been for 6 months in a psychiatric hospital, overcoming 19 years of drug and substance abuse. It's not where any parent wants to be, but she's been clean for 6 months. So we're going to celebrate that and see if we can't move forward. Success is, you can't wait for the final outcome. You got to find joy in the middle of what you're living. So to me, success is the journey, not the destination.
Appreciate that so much, Kevin. And I know that this is something that I needed to hear, and I know a lot of others as well. So I appreciate you taking the time to come out, spend an hour or so with me today on the Engineers Success Podcast. I know we talked about going for 3 hours, but I think we'll end it right there. I appreciate it so much. And thank you for all that you've, done and for your time today. It's really been an inspiration.
It's been a joy to come here and spend this time with you and just reflect on these things. Every entrepreneur, if you ask them, I'm Calvinistic in my theology. So God's in charge of everything, and you can't roll the dice without it already being ordained what the number's going to be. And I feel a little bit lucky in everything that's happened.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.